We have one of the biggest regular season games in the history of one of the biggest rivalries in college hockey, and plenty more to talk about. This week in Hockey East starts now. Hi, everyone, and welcome to a big jam-packed This Week in Hockey East. Great to be with you along with Tyler Murray. I'm Eric Galante. We have a lot of games across Hockey East. We're going to talk about them. There are a lot of really exceptional games in the country this week, but there is one that stands above the rest. For the first time in the history of one of the best rivalries in college hockey, Boston University and Boston College will play as the number 1 and the number 2 team in the nation. Tyler, you will be there along with Jim Connolly and Laura Stickles on both Friday and Saturday. Let's start to set this game up and what we're going to see between these two teams.
Yeah, at this point of the week, folks, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these incredible nuggets. 14 NHL draft picks on either side, more than any other team in the country. A lot of fans evoking the 1978 National Championship as maybe the best comparison for what's on the line. That wasn't a 1 versus 2, but obviously a huge moment in the history of this rivalry. You're seeing the top 2 scorers face off. Macklin Celebrini and Gabe Perreault, 1 and 2 in the points per game contest. Zoom out a little bit. It's the top 4 scorers as well. You're throwing in Will Smith and Lane Hudson. Of course, note that that's 3 freshmen and 1 sophomore. Put a couple of Nadeaus in after that. Then you get Cutter Gauthier and Ryan Leonard to round out the top 8 in scoring. So much star power, so many storylines. First Hockey East 1 versus 2 battle since UNH beat Boston College in overtime back on November 19th, 2002. But there's just so much more to this matchup to dive into, to maybe try to find who has an edge. I don't think that's possible, but to break it down, we're going to highlight 3 different keys to the series each, whether it's a player, a trend, a unit. And Eric, like I said, it all begins with star power on both sides, but why don't we start with Boston College?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that you mentioned the word star power so often in games like this, maybe not 1 versus 2, but games like this with so many NHL draft picks. You think of the stars, but what's amazing about this particular matchup, and we talked a little bit about this on X over the last week, but the star players not only are there, but they are playing their best hockey of the season right now. Let's start with the Boston College side of things. Let's just take their top 4 picks. So Gabe Perreault, Ryan Leonard, and Will Smith all playing on the same line, and Cutter Gauthier as well. They are averaging, 4 guys together are averaging 3.3 goals and 8 points per game since coming back from World Juniors alone. And they're also combined plus 24 in those 4 games. So there's been absolutely no let up from that group since coming back from World Juniors. But on the other side, very similar as well, because Macklin Celebrini, he is now officially still first in points per game. He's second in Hockey East behind Gabe Perreault in points, but he's played exceptionally well. Celebrini in 4 games since World Juniors, 6 goals, 7 points, 27 shots, which is his most shots in any 4-game stretch for BU this year. Lane Hudson on the other side, 4 assists on Friday. He has 8 points in 4 games since coming back from World Juniors. So not only is this a game of star power, Tyler, but it is a game where the stars are playing like it. And that leads you to believe that there is going to be so much firepower in this game.
I think what's made the difference for these two teams, maybe last year for BU, but especially this year for both, is the defensive side. Let's dial in on that. BU's defense, 2.3 goals allowed per game. That's tied with Providence for best in Hockey East and top 5 in the country. Boston College is right there, just 2.4 goals allowed per game, down from 2.9 last year. But BU, they dress 7 NHL draft picks regularly on the blue line. Includes top pairing Lane Hudson and Tom Willander, really dynamic duo. Willander, the team's highest draft pick, 11th overall to the Canucks last year. Lane Hudson, 10 goals, which is second in the nation among freshmen. But I want to talk about block shots, not goal scoring, because it's really become a part of BU's identity. They lead Hockey East with 14 blocks a game. 6'7" Cabe Weber is number 1 in the country with 3 a night. Case McCarthy, he's second in Hockey East with 45 blocks this year, tied with Boston College's Aiden Hershuk. And we hear a lot from coaches, you don't necessarily want to lead the league in block shots because it means you're giving up too many shots, but not BU. It's about 28 a game. That's 4th in Hockey East in that department. And it speaks to what Jay Pandolfo had pointed to early in the year when BU did not have a regulation win through 3 games. He said, we have to earn our offense and our high skill opportunities by fully committing to defense. And they were at 10 blocks a game in those 3, shaky games to begin the year. They're at 15 a game since then. They've won 15 of 18. And why is that especially important against Boston College, the block shots? Well, BC is second in the country in shot percentage behind only Denver. And the simple way to put it is 13% of the time BC gets a shot on goal through all those big bodies. That shot goes in the net. And when they outshoot opponents this year, they're 11-0. So we'll see if BU can get some bodies in front of the absolutely elite shooting for Boston College this weekend.
And of course, if they don't, then the challenge is going to be on Matthew Caron. And I really want to focus in on him. You mentioned those 2 games earlier in the season, and BU's only lost twice since then, by the way. So it feels so long ago now. But if you look at some of the stretches here for Boston University, and Matthew Caron, numbers-wise, is playing the best hockey of his career right now. BU's won 7 games in a row. He's won 7 games in a row. In that stretch, 7-0, a 1.43 goals against average, and a 947 save percentage. Now, I want to talk specifically, and I think we mentioned this on the show last week, but his game against New Hampshire a couple of weeks ago at home was statistically the best game of his career. And here's what I mean by that. We have a stat called expected goals allowed, right? Which means just what it sounds like. The amount of goals you're expected to allow based on where the shots are coming from. His expected goals allowed in that game against UNH was 2.4. He allowed 0. So that 2.4 goals below what he was expected to give up is the best mark of his career. That includes his time at Brown. That includes his time at BU. Now, outside of that game, BU has done a pretty good job limiting shots. So as good as he's been, he hasn't been tested a ton. He's only had 1 game in this stretch where he's had to make 30-plus saves. So that's what you're talking about with Boston College. How high do their shots rise? But which Matthew Caron do we see in goal? Do we see what we've seen lately from him? Because if we do, that's a huge advantage for Boston University.
And let's see just how consistently BC can pepper the goaltender. We know about the top 6 forwards. You got Cutter Gauthier with the 2 Bruins draft picks. You got the Team USA line on line 2. But what about line 3 for the Eagles? It's somewhat new. It's a combination of Jamie Armstrong, Jack Malone, and Will Vogt. That line scored 3 goals against Merrimack on Sunday and a pair of huge goals the previous Friday against Providence. A quick disclaimer, Vogt left the game against Merrimack after taking a hard check their last time out. We'll keep an eye on his availability, hopefully just precautionary. But before last weekend, surprising that each of those 3 guys actually had a plus-minus at or below 0. That doesn't tell the whole story. Armstrong was banged up. They haven't been playing together all year. But just recently being paired up and the trio together, it seems like they're clicking quite a bit and getting more consistent ice time together. So we know they're going to get scoring for the top 6 forwards, but whichever team can find production beyond that could have a major advantage. And just on paper, it's a nice combination of Armstrong and Malone, their size and physicality, with the skill of the smaller Vogt, who's 5'8". He's one of 10 U.S. under-18 products on this Eagles team. But Vogt's actually been doing some dirty work himself. He's winning puck battles, extending plays, strong work along the wall, so a really nice mix they have there. And of course, Jamie Armstrong, a rare case of a BU player transferring to BC for his grad year. He was one of the part of one of the best lines on the 4th line in the entire country last year. Jay Pandolfo would say all the time, I thought our 4th line was our best line tonight. Armstrong, a huge part of that. And he really does bring a nice edge to this BC team. He's playing in his 10th battle of COMM more than anybody else on the BC roster. But of course, it's his first on the other side. So Armstrong will be a fun player to watch this weekend.
Yeah, and you mentioned that 3rd line production. It's interesting because we mentioned the top 4 guys from Boston College are averaging more than 3 goals a game in the last 4. But remember, BC has scored more than 6 goals 3 times in their last 4 games. So they're getting production beyond that top 4 as well. As a last key for me, you mentioned his name earlier, Aiden Hershuk for Boston College. When we've talked to Greg Brown about who's maybe the guy that's not being talked about that's been really important, he keeps mentioning Aiden Hershuk, who's been paired most of the year with Aram Manetian for BC on the back line. Hershuk, you mentioned, he's tied for 2nd in Hockey East in block shots, but he's also starting to produce on the offensive end as well. Hershuk had a goal and 4 assists last weekend. He was actually scored the goal that was generated by the 3rd line early in the game against Merrimack on Sunday. He has points in 6 of his last 10 games. But really, it speaks to a bigger picture thing on defense for Boston College. So often you see a team kind of riding one defensive player and that guy having to be on the ice for a long time. Lane Hudson, who averages more than 25 minutes a game for BU. Now, obviously, there's reasons he's out on the ice for a long time, right? But Boston College and Greg Brown feels like his defense has played so well all the way through top to bottom that they only have one player who has to average more than 20 minutes a game. So he's been really pleased that he has not had to ride Eamon Powell too much, and he can kind of spread things out on the defensive end. But Aiden Hershuk's been really, really good for BC, and that's something to watch for this weekend.
And final point on this great matchup as we wrap up this preview segment. It's such a hard series to predict, impossible to pick a winner, but we still heard all week, Eric, who do you guys like better? Who has the better roster? And it's like, it's illegal for you to ask me that at this point. But if you want to look at maybe one edge, is there some experience advantage for BU? Yes, in terms of games played in this rivalry. But then it brings up another question. Does that even matter? Does experience matter if the top 3 scorers in the league are freshmen? Do you need veteran big game experience if you have a bunch of guys who just played in World Juniors for a gold medal? Experience didn't matter for a couple of BC freshmen last year. Cutter Gauthier had multiple points in 3 of the 4 games. Andre Gasso scored in all 4 games against BU. But they are 2 of the youngest teams in the country. BC is the youngest overall. BU is number 4. And they do have a few more guys who have had a lot more experience in this rivalry. Sam Stevens, for instance, has been in all 11 of these games, which is more than anyone else on the team. Luke Tuck always seems to play well against Boston College. Of course, his brother Alex spent 2 years on the Heights. Luke has 5 goals and 2 assists in his 9 career games in this rivalry. And then Ty Gallagher, the Bruins draft pick, averaging over a point per game from the blue line against BC. BU talks a lot about the unfinished business from last year's run to the Frozen Four, and that goes from fifth-year guys like Case McCarthy, who's going to play in his 11th Battle of COMM, down to Lane Hudson, who just got his first taste of it last year. But of course, they know if they want to get back to the Frozen Four and beyond, BC is the team standing in their way. So I'm not saying experience matters, but if it matters to you out there, a slight edge for BU. So maybe that means more discipline. Maybe that means less time in the box. But I think you really do kind of throw out those kind of things when it comes to penalties and discipline. It's just a luck of the draw what might happen, especially because...
it kind of shows how even these two teams are, right? That it's so hard to find things. What makes this one better, which is what is going to make this weekend so much fun. Again, 7 o'clock on NESN Friday and Saturday. We can't wait to watch it. It's not the only games going on this weekend, though, in Hockey East. There's another big tournament coming up, though, and that's the Connecticut Ice Tournament, which will be hosted in Hartford this year. And Tyler, kind of under the radar here, the Yukon Huskies starting to come here a little bit. They're in the top 21 of the pairwise now all of a sudden.
Yeah, it could be a big weekend for them. They got the Sacred Heart Friday at 4, and then Saturday, either Yale or Quinnipiac at the XL Center. Yeah, they're coming on because Yukon got an impressive 2-1 win at UNH last Saturday. They lead the league with 4 wins when scoring less than 3 goals now. They're tied with UMass Lowell in that gritty department. A major character win in Durham, especially because they dropped the series opener at home 5-0, which is a game that was 1-0 into the third. And then UNH gets 3 goals in about a minute and a half, and that just ends things. It takes the energy out of the building. And it wasn't a back-to-back like normal, so they have to stew on that loss, travel to New Hampshire, stay overnight, and then gear up for a 4 p.m. game. Okay, ready to go, clean slate. But then, boom, 3 minutes into the game, their captain and top-line center, Hudson Shandor, gets a game misconduct for a kneeing penalty. So you're without one of your leaders. You got to kill off a 5-minute major, which they do. And even though they were outshot 16-7 in that first period, UConn gets to the intermission scoreless. Now, heading into that game, Mike Cavanaugh tweaked a few lines, and it paid off. His 2 fourth-line wingers, Joey Muldowney and Ryan Tattle, they move up from line 4 to line 2 to play with Matthew Wood. Tattle winds up scoring the game's first goal, assisted by Matthew Wood. Wood's actually on the longest goal-scoring drought of his career, but once he gets his next one, that is bad news for the rest of Hockey East. And without Shandor, they had to mix and match a little bit. They play Tristan Fraser with Jake Richard and Chase Bradley, and those guys connect for a beauty of an eventual game-winning goal at Fraser with the eyes in the back of his head to set Bradley up. But I think the real story is the goaltending of Arseny Sergeyev. He just won Hockey East Goaltender of the Week for this effort. At the very least, maybe he's your Game 2 goaltender every weekend going forward for UConn. 2 Saturdays ago, he shuts out Maine. That's their biggest win of the season so far still. Sunday, he's 7 minutes away from another shutout against UNH, but a turnover left Kristaps Skrastins all alone at the net front, and that's the only goal that Sergeyev gives up as part of a career-high 43-save effort. This is a guy who maybe had given up a lot of the playing time to Ethan Hyder, but Mike Kavanaugh talked about working about the fundamentals, and he's really dialed things in. Arseniy Sergeyev could be a major factor in the race toward the Hockey East playoffs.
One more thing before we go to our short shift segment today, and then we have a special segment at the end of the program for the first time. I know it's a few days old now, but how great was the Beanpot final, the women's Beanpot final with Northeastern with an overtime win over BU in front of 10,633 fans. The announced attendance at TD Garden, which I think exceeded expectations, which is really, really amazing. First of all, the games were great. Harvard winning the third place game in a shootout. Both games, I should say, had a extra attacker late goal to send it to overtime to eventually get an overtime winner for Northeastern and a shootout winner for Harvard. Skylar Irving with 2 goals, including the game winner. She had 9 shots in that game. But I thought that Laura Bellamy, the head coach at Harvard, said it best. As much as they won the third place game, women's hockey was the winner across the board. And it was amazing to see. Congratulations to all the folks who were involved in getting the women's Beanpots TD Garden. Congratulations to all the folks on the broadcast as part of the all-female broadcast crew, which was awesome to see. I think this is the first of many, and that's really, really exciting. And as a final note, Northeastern here, 8-1-1 in their last 10. They're still not maybe scoring at the rate they have been the last little bit, but Tyler, they've given up 10 goals in their last 10 games. They have not given up more than 1 goal in their last 8. Gwyneth Phillips has a .955 save percentage for the season, which is really good to begin with. She has a .963 over this 10-game stretch. So watch out for the Beanpot champion Huskies.
Yeah, it's such a great event to watch, and a great job by Nesson and the whole crew. I keep going back to the Taze Thompson interview after the second period with Natalie Norrie. It's a 1-0 game, maybe an intense moment, a huge game, but Thompson can't get the smile off her face. She's like looking around like, this is amazing. This is a memory we're all going to have. And that's in the middle of a game. And I think our guy Tom Caron said it well. It's certainly a win for women's hockey, but it's a win for hockey. That was such a great night for our sport, and you can only hope it continues. Time for us now to take a few short shifts presented by The Shift Group, helping elite athletes and veterans become elite sales professionals. Eric, what do you have for us this week?
Yeah, let's talk about UNH and Maine in this Borders series on the women's side. It's 4:00 Saturday, scheduled to air on Nesson. We've talked so much about UNH here recently and what they've done with Sedona Blair in goal. She's playing really, really well. Even in her loss on Sunday against UConn, she made 30-plus saves again. That's the 8th time this year she's made 30-plus saves. UNH's penalty kill has been excellent, though they dropped a couple. They allowed a couple goals against UConn after killing 24 penalties in a row. But this Maine team, which I mentioned that Northeastern record, 8-1-1 in their last 10, the only loss and tie in there is to Maine on the road. So this Maine team, which now quietly has 2 of the top goal scorers in Hockey East entering this weekend. But I want to talk specifically about Anne-Frédérique Gay. It's really an amazing story. She played 4 years at Division III Norwich. She comes to Maine as a grad transfer, and all she's done is lead Hockey East in goals with 19. So that should be a fun 2-game series this weekend, UNH and Maine.
It's been fun in just about every barn all year in Hockey East. These fans are second to none. Every rink in the league has had at least one sellout this year. No other conference has done that across the country. And last Friday and Saturday, this one's remarkable. All 7 league games sold out. So home games for Maine, UConn, Vermont, Merrimack, and Northeastern. Completely packed barns. You look at the national attendance numbers, Hockey East has 6 of the top 15 teams in average attendance, almost like the pairwise, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But it's kind of a reminder that we're only 3 years removed from the season where these players and coaches had to go to work without fans in the building. I'm just happy they're not cardboard anymore, but the fact that they are packing the house, selling out arenas for a historically great Hockey East season, it's just a testament to how much people around here love college hockey and how healthy the league is right now. And it's healthy in more ways than one, Eric, as we move into the pairwise conversation. Some very interesting games coming up.
This is one of those words, the pairwise, that we throw around so much. And, I think most folks and hockey fans know what it is. Maybe some don't know exactly how it works and how these comparisons happen. So we thought, because we're going to be talking about it so much down the stretch of the season, we might just give a little primer, little reminder for some, maybe a little primer for others. What is the pairwise? The most important thing to remember with this ranking system is we're not actually ranking teams. We are comparing teams head to head. So every team gets compared to every other team in the country, and whoever wins that comparison gets a point. Whoever has the most comparison points is who's in first in the pairwise, who's in second, who's in third, so on down the list. So Boston University right now, there are 64 teams in the country. BU wins their comparison against all other 63 teams, and that's why they have 63 pairwise points, and that's why they're in first. BC, same thing. They win 62 comparisons. They lose one, which is to BU right now. That's why BC is second. There's Wisconsin at 61, and so on and so forth down the list. Now, how do we compare these teams? There's three criterias: the RPI, head-to-head, and then common opponents. Common opponents is the big one, and that's why we couldn't have a pairwise a couple years ago in that season you mentioned, where there were no non-conference games, because there's no common opponents between non-conference teams, so you can't do the pairwise. The point of this system is to be able to compare teams objectively without any subjectivity involved across conferences. The RPI is your basic RPI, same as basketball, same as other NCAA sports. In college hockey, we weight certain things differently in the RPI, though. So, for example, home wins and road losses, they don't factor quite as much as road wins and home losses. Let's put that a little bit more simply, right? If you lose at home, it hurts more than losing on the road. If you win on the road, it helps a little bit more than winning at home. There also is a weight for overtime wins. An OT win counts for 2/3 of a win for pairwise purposes, but only 1/3 of a loss, maybe more importantly. And then the final weight, and this is why we talk about certain games being so important, there are quality win bonus points awarded if you beat a top 20 RPI team. That's why UConn's win at New Hampshire, a road win, plus a win against the top 20 RPI team, was so crucial for UConn. So that's one. Criteria 2, head-for-head makes sense. And then you have the common opponents. Let's use an example to show how we do these comparisons. Let's take, why is BU ahead of BC right now? Well, first we look at RPI. BU's RPI is slightly ahead of BC, so they get 1 point. They haven't played head-to-head yet, so no point there. And then finally, we look at common opponents. They've played 6 opponents in common this year. And it's important to remember, we don't just take the record of the opponents in common, we sum the winning percentage against those 6 teams. So if we sum the winning percentage for BU, that equals 5.5 compared to 4.75 for BC. So BU wins 2 of the 3 criteria points, and thus they beat BC 2-0 in this comparison, and that's why they get 1 pairwise point. For argument's sake, does a head-to-head win for BC on this Friday night put them ahead of BU? Not necessarily, because look what happens. Let's say, for argument's sake, BC wins tonight. They now win the head-to-head criteria, which gives them a point, but they still lose this comparison 2-1. Now, it's very possible that BC with the win would move ahead of BU in the RPI, but for argument's sake, let's leave RPI alone. The head-to-head win doesn't in itself move a team up over the other. Another good example of that is Denver against Boston College earlier this year, right? Denver beat Boston College head-to-head. BC has a higher RPI, but then in common opponents, they do have one. It's Providence. Denver lost their game to Providence this year. BC won 2 of 3, so BC has a better summed win percentage. So BC wins the comparison with Denver 2-1. That's why BC is ahead of Denver in the pairwise right now. One important note, it doesn't matter whether you win one of these comparisons 1-0 or 3-0 or anything in between, you still just get 1 pairwise point. And if there's a tie, it would go to the team with the higher RPI. One final example for you. Let's take, why did UConn move up so much? And why did UNH seemingly drop a little bit after UConn's win on Sunday? Well, remember we told you it's a quality win bonus for UConn and a win on the road. And what that has allowed UConn to do is their resume is better. As such, they now win comparisons against teams that they previously did not win comparisons against. And thus their ranking is higher. Same on the other side with UNH. Let's use an example. UNH beat UMass in a comparison on Saturday, but they now lose one after Sunday. Why is that? Well, let's look prior to Sunday. UNH had a higher RPI than UMass. And UNH's win percentage against common opponents summed to the exact same number as UMass's, 2.75. So no points awarded there. UNH wins the comparison 1-0 because they haven't played yet this year. But after the loss to UConn, UNH's RPI fell slightly. So now UMass's RPI is higher than UNH's, so they get a point there. And plus, in the common opponents, the win total, the win percentage, I should say, now drops for UNH. So UMass has a higher summed win percentage than UNH does. So they get a point there. And thus they now win the comparison 2-0 after a day before they had lost the comparison 1-0. So teams aren't necessarily rising and falling so much as they are either winning or losing more comparisons against other teams than they did the day before. And of course, as the season goes on, the volatility lessens a little bit because there's more evidence on the table. So things won't jump around quite as much.
And when you talk about comparisons, that's another reason why in non-conference play, Hockey East collectively, they want all of their teams to win games against other conferences, because if you drop it, then everyone else's comparison head-to-head maybe takes a little bit of a hit. That's a phenomenal breakdown, Eric. It's a really interesting way to try to size up who's going to get those at-large bids to the national tournament. So keep an eye on that bubble. One big win, like we just saw from UConn, could really change things heading in toward tournament time. So it's fascinating stuff. Thanks for breaking that down.
Absolutely. And it is going to be so much fun this weekend. We can't wait to see the games. And remember, we'll be here every Friday, breaking it all down the rest of the season on This Week in Hockey East. Thanks so much for joining us, and enjoy this weekend.